morning, everybody. Great to see you all again. I hope that you all had some nice time during the 4th of July weekend. Did people have fun? Yes. Hand up. Yeah, okay. I had fun. My dog did not. My dog is terrified of loud noises. He is a sheltered animal and didn't do so well, but I think it's a learning curve. I'm convinced when he becomes adult, we are going to get his noise sensitivity eliminated. So anyway, well, good to see you all. I am going to go ahead and start with roll call. Dog snacks. And I know I see you, but if you'll just say here anyway, that will make our process go a little faster. So Kelly, do I see Kelly? I don't see Kelly Abbott. No Kelly right now. Okay, Norma is on the phone, Trace. She's already checked in and on her way. Michelle Bradley.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Where are you? Why can't I see you? Oh, you are. Hello. I did say it. Ashley.
Hello.
Good morning, Anna. Anna Cole. All right. Jenna Coleman is absent today. We know that. Brian Cotter. Not seeing Brian on the screen. All right. Dennis.
Here. Hi.
Good morning, Dennis. Janelle.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi. Good morning, Janelle. Dave Hayes.
Good morning, everyone.
We have David. Great. Gotcha. Chelsea Hill. Oh,
Yes, I'm here.
hi, Chelsea.
Hi.
Kevin Lash is absent, Trace. Dave Lee.
Oh, that's me again. I guess I'm two people.
Are you two people? Great. We may have a new member with us today. Sergeant Timothy Smelzer, are you present? No, I do not see him. And just for the group's information, Chase Leonard, Canyon City, is stepped off, but in his place, we have Sergeant Timothy Smelzer, and he will be appearing at some point.
He actually just emailed me. He was just having an issue with the link, so he'll be joining in just a moment.
Oh, great. We'll come back.
Okay, perfect.
Great. Renee.
Yep, here.
Hi, Beth.
Morning.
Brandon.
Good morning.
Miss Becky.
Good morning, everybody.
Elizabeth.
Here.
Lynette.
Here.
And Jana.
Here.
Morning again. All right. Did I get everybody? Is there anybody I did not call that is a member of the task force? I think I've got everybody. Okay, fantastic. Moving on, I want to go to the materials that were sent to all of you through your Dropbox link. I want to talk about approval of our June 14th, 2023 meeting minutes. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections that need to be made to those minutes? All right, I see none. If I could have a motion to pass the June 14th minutes and a second, please.
Dennis, I'll move to approve. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I can second them. So,
Okay. Ashley Chase made our motion for approval. Dennis seconded it. Is there anybody opposed to passage of the June 14th minutes? Raise your hands. All right, then those meeting minutes will pass. The second document that I want to go to is the meeting recap, also from June 14th. As you all recall, that is a fuller version of the meeting minutes. It's the narrative form. And again, just to sort of re-summarize, the purpose of that summary is really about us encapsulating those meeting conversations, those points of collaboration, and to start using those meeting recaps to go into the final reports that are coming up. So I just want to emphasize that those are important to read because those will be the documents that we will in large part be lifting and putting into the larger report. So having said that, any changes, additions, anything that members would like to raise about that document? Okay, great. If I could also have a motion and a second for approval of the meeting recap from June 14.
I make that motion.
Lynette, thank you.
I'll
I'll
second.
sec-
All right, I think I got Dave Lee up in the corner who seconded it. Is there anybody who is opposed to the passage of the June 14th meeting recap? All right, I see none. We'll go ahead and that meeting recap will pass. And Trace, I think that that is my work here.
Oops, sorry. I was going to say real quick, I did see Sergeant Smelzer, I think I'm saying that right, join. So I just wanted to give if you wanted to give a quick hello and have him say hi and introduce himself real quick.
Yes, there you are. Good morning. Whoops, we have you on. We cannot hear you yet.
Can't hear you.
Hi, good morning.
Hey, Gina, how are you?
I'm pretty good. My camera is acting weird. I am working on it, but I am here. Good morning, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
We can come back to Sergeant Smelzer. Sergeant Smelzer, you figure out what's going on with your audio, but as Stephanie mentioned, he's going to be replacing Commander Leonard, and so excited to have you here. And Sergeant Smelzer, we know that you've got a lot to catch up on. So even if you're just listening today, if your audio doesn't work, totally fine. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah,
Perfect. My audio is good. It's just my camera doesn't want to switch on first, but I'm here. Apologies, everyone. I'm Gina Lopez. I promise I'll try to get a picture up here going for you. I am with the Colorado Coalition Against as a system response director. I am also a member of the tribe. I work out here from Toyoak, so fun times with signals and things like that, but I will get it. Thank you. I can hear you and all of those.
Perfect. I'm actually glad. Sorry, Gina. I was also talking to Sergeant Smelzer is also new today. So Gina, I appreciate you jumping in and giving that introduction as well. Gina, is this your first meeting?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I missed that as well. So sorry, can you repeat real quick? Can you do that introduction again for folks? I think we somehow missed that. So I'm really glad you're here. And we do quite a bit of work down in Toyoak with Keystone. So that's a fun kind of overlap. I'm sure you know Ernest House Jr. Is a colleague of mine. So I'm excited to be connected with you. But yeah, if you could give a quick introduction to folks again, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, perfect. Gina Lopez. Hey, everyone. I work for CICASA, Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault. I'm the Systems Response Program Director. Before that, I was the victim advocate for our tribe program for 3 years here in Toyoak, responding to all victims of war crime. I also facilitate a multi-tribal, multidisciplinary coalition, non-funded, wholly grassroots, involving lots of tribal response folks, was serving over 200 folks. And so I work for CICASA, and I work remotely from Toyoak here at home. And yeah, that's a quick spiel about me.
Perfect. Gina, thanks so much. We're super excited to have you here and really honored to have you all the way from Toyoak. So I know that sometimes with the video down there can be tough in my experience. So really appreciate you being here and excited for you to join in. And I'll make sure that we do, you and also Sergeant Smelzer, we'll do kind of a one-on-one to kind of catch y'all up to speed. But I think today should also be a really helpful conversation for you to join in. Okay, perfect. We're going to get going. So Michael, if you could bring that up, I will. Okay, so basically these are our, so for folks that are just joining, everybody kind of knows this drill, but we have a number of directives that we're driving towards, and we want to just make sure that folks understand what we've kind of checked off from the report perspective, and also what we're driving towards. We're still couched really in the same. So you'll see the third and fourth one are the ones that we're working on, and then kind of bump over to the analyze how entities responsible for the care of children can coordinate responses. That's really the one that we're adding on as we have our panel discussion today around what are some opportunities that folks see for statewide coordination and efforts. And so that's really the directive that we see today's conversation fitting under. And then also the analyzing root cause and identifying and analyzing behaviors. The task force, as you know, you all have done a significant amount of work on that already, but we still see that fitting into these conversations as we talk about what would be possible for statewide coordinated care efforts. So we kind of kept those up as ongoing. And then Michael, if you can go to the next slide, I just want to remind folks of the timeline. So, again, we have this kind of overarching question of what constitutes running from care, but also in addition to the directives that we just went over. We have our next meeting August 9th with a reflection and discussion. So looking back at these past 3 meetings, and then September 6th, once again, that's my birthday. Happy birthday. Can't wait to spend it with you all, is our interim report finalization, where again, those meeting recaps will really inform that interim report, and you all will have an opportunity to respond to that. But I don't think there will be any surprises based on the fact that we're pulling really directly from those recaps in order to inform that report. And then starting in October, we move on to the prevention side of things, which I know a lot of folks are eager to get into. So lots of work to do between now and September with the interim report. And then we'll kind of be shifting gears a little bit into October. Stephanie, any, just from your end, anything that you would add as far as our runway? Just want to make sure I'm not missing any context you want to make sure we add.
No, I mean, there isn't. I did neglect just to give the group an update though. And that is that next Tuesday, which I believe is the 17th, it's the 18th, I've been asked to appear in front of a legislative interim committee that is really analyzing child welfare practice in Colorado. And they've asked that I report out on these 2 task force, our mandatory reporting task force, as well as this one. So just wanted to give you an update on that. Really, we're going to be providing a fact sheet just explaining who's on the task force, what our deadlines are, what the charges are, and then giving an update on where we are a year to date. So I just wanted to keep everybody in that loop.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Okay, moving on. We pulled out, so actually we can skip this, Michael. Sorry, we already went over this piece. I kind of got ahead of myself, so we're good there. Let's get into it. We've got a lot of conversations and a lot of work time today. So I'm actually going to hand things over to Doris to kind of talk around our next steps with the panel that we've got. A lot of you folks who we're bringing you into a conversation. So Doris, if you want to jump in, we'll go from there.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. I had to double check to make sure that I was unmuted. Good morning, everyone. So we have 3 panelists today that will be helping us kind of frame our discussion today around these 2 questions that you all had in the survey. But our conversation today is going to be focused on the intervention side in thinking about a couple of ideas that Stephanie shared in our last meeting together when she did a kind of a national landscape of what other states are doing. We're using these as an examples, albeit not exhaustive of the possibilities of conversation and recommendations that may come from this task force, but as a way for us to begin thinking about how an approach might be implemented in Colorado, what considerations might we be thinking about, what challenges and opportunities might exist. And so we wanted to have that conversation with some specific examples in mind. Again, not intended to be exhaustive. You may also recall that we will be talking about both intervention. So what do we do when a child or youth runs away What is the response across the state? And then also, what are the recommendations that this group might make to prevent children and youth from running away? Today, we're really honing in on that. What might we do if and when a child or youth runs away? So I'm naming that just because we recognize that we have to be thinking about both pieces, both responses, both to prevent running away and also when children and youth do run away, how does the state respond? So it's a pleasure to have some of the thinking and some conversation around our 3 panelists today. Renee, I want to make sure that I'm saying your last name correctly. I don't want to butcher it, but is it Marquardt or is it Marquette?
Neither, none of the above. It's Marquardt. It's
Marquardt. So it is exactly how it's spelled.
exactly how it's spelled. It just throws everyone off, but I answer to anything.
All right. Well, you probably don't answer to anything, but appreciate your flexibility and also for clarifying the which I should know at this point, but I'm really bad with names. So our 3 panelists are Renee Marquardt, Lynette Overmeyer, and Brandon Miller. And I think we're going to pin you so that all of us can sort of be in this virtual space looking as though we're having a more intimate conversation than with all the Brady Bunch boxes.
Sorry, Doris, you've got a lot more than that on your panel. Did you just say those 3?
I did.
Yeah, no, you're good. So we've got Dennis, Lynette, Brandon, Dr. Marquardt, and Michelle and Dave.
Thank you. My apologies. I
No, you're
was
good.
looking at the list from the survey responses.
Yeah, you're good.
My apologies. Thank you. So I think we're going to pin all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of you, and we'll offer an opportunity for each of you to introduce yourself. Love that we have some new task force members, so this will be an opportunity for them to meet some of you and learn more about your respective backgrounds, and then we'll dive into our discussion. Why don't we go ahead and start with you, Dennis?
Hello, I'm Dennis Disparis. I'm the Provider Services Manager for the Division of Child Welfare. My role and the role of my crew, so to speak, is to implement a lot of the recommendations of this group once they're finalized.
Awesome. Thank you, Dennis. Lynette?
I'm Lynette Overmeyer. I'm the Assessment Manager in Mesa County. I began my career working with adolescents, still work with adolescents, along with other youth and children and families, and helping to secure safety for youth that leave placement without permission. I'm trying to find the right words. Has been a passion of mine, and we even started a runaway task intervention group over here on the Western Slope. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lynette. My apologies in advance. I'm having something going on with my allergies, so if my voice cuts in and out, or if I clear my throat, that's why. Brandon Miller.
Hi, I'm Brandon Miller. I'm the Executive Director at Southern Peaks. We're a provider for the state of Colorado.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon. Good to see you today. Dr. Marquardt.
Hi, I'm Renee Marquardt. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Colorado Department of Human Services. I know we introduced ourselves originally, but just for what's relevant to this is I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist by background, and have worked with kids in the child welfare system throughout my career, and kids in worked in residential centers and et cetera. So I've also from something that I've paid attention to throughout my career.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then Michelle Bradley.
Hi, I'm Michelle Bradley. I am a supervisor in Douglas County, and I supervise an ongoing adolescent team. So the running is something I deal with on the daily.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. And then David Lee.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is David Lee. Hate to say it, hardly anybody ever confuses pronunciating my name. I guess it's just so common. David Lee, I am the Division Youth Services Western Region Director. What does that mean? I still try to figure that out after 12 years. But ultimately, the Division Youth Services is split into 4 regions. I'm on the western side of the state, which our region encompasses 18 counties and 6 judicial districts. I have oversight of the CYDC, the Colorado Youth Detention Continuum. Again, we have so many acronyms across our state that none of us remember what they mean. But that is ultimately the detention continuum of kids going into detention and kids being supervised out in the community as they continue through the court process. Also have oversight of our committed youth out in the western side of the state, and those committed youth that end up going out onto parole, transition into parole and as they discharge. So quite the range of working with youth involved in the juvenile justice system.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. I am, even though I knew who was going to be on the panel, I think that we have like an amazing group here that represents providers, folks with expertise in the sort of understanding the unique and challenging needs from a therapeutic lens, and then also the various groups who might respond when a child or youth leaves an out-of-home placement. So it's a pleasure for all of you to provide your thinking and insights on these 2 sort of large questions, and we'll dig deeper as the conversation unfolds. But I want to start with, and then we'll do a round robin, but getting your perspectives on the development of a dedicated statewide absconder unit in Colorado. So we heard last time about sort of this idea of an absconder unit that I think is in the Denver metro area. But in thinking about how such a unit could be stood up and implemented statewide, would love to hear from you on potential benefits of implementing such an approach, and then also what some of the challenges might be in doing so, recognizing the unique and disparate needs that might exist in different communities across the state. I think we'll go in reverse order of the introductions and start with you, David.
Wonderful. Put me on the spotlight here. Do I think it would be beneficial for us to have a response team, absconder unit? I'm saying absconder unit because I'm thinking about this stuff that I read from the state of Tennessee. Yes, I do think it would be very beneficial. How could it not? I mean, but there's some things as I read through that going, I wish if we were to develop something like that, I would want our team, that absconder unit or response team, to do more than what I read through the Tennessee stuff. I mean, when I read through that stuff on Tennessee, it was just like they're the holder of information. They don't really, I mean, I hate to say it, they don't really do much when they going out and looking for people. That's what I would like to see, is somebody that has a team that actually, instead of just gathering information, calling people, finding out what their last location was and checking social media, I want somebody boots on the ground, actually helping look for these youth that could potentially be in some tough situations. So yeah, I definitely see a benefit. I do like the identifying a standard protocol that impacts and encompasses all agencies. When I say that, I'm thinking of DYS, county departments, child welfare, law enforcement. I mean, I think right now we all do our own thing. I mean, and it would just be nice to have a standard protocol, like what we all do. As I read through some of this stuff from Tennessee, like I'm thinking of like county departments or even the juvenile justice stuff. Some of these things that were outlined in here, I believe we already do a majority of it. It's just not spelled out for us, or we don't document it clearly in certain areas. So those are my thoughts at this point.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that, David. We'll come back to the question around standardized protocols in that second question, but would love to hear from others around the potential benefits and challenges of implementing some kind of a absconder unit statewide. I love that data that David pointed out. This model in Tennessee, some of the limitations in thinking about what that could look like, what such a unit could look like in Colorado, and some of the gaps, and maybe going beyond just the what sounds like more desk-based work, and actually doing some active work to locate children or youth who have run away. I'm going to call on you, Michelle, to give us your thoughts on again, this question around challenges and potential benefits of implementing such an approach in Colorado.
I think what's interesting is like we often hear that from the parents that we work with. Like I have to call a parent and say, hey, I need to notify you that your child ran. And their first question is, who's looking for them? It's not me. It's not the caseworker. I mean, we do efforts, right? But like we aren't actually driving around and looking for them. So that's often a question parents ask. I think when I was thinking about this, I had more questions than I think I had anything else. Like, how would this be put into practice? Like, what would happen if they were found? Like, if, we had custody or didn't have custody, would that change the process? Like, where would they go? Because sometimes placements take them back and sometimes not. And like, is there an expectation then for the department to go pick up this kid from this unit? I think I just had a lot more questions. I like the idea, especially, someone actively looking for them. But I think, yeah, just kind of like, how does this actually work in real life? I think I had more questions around.
Thank you. David, I see your hand up.
One thing that working with the state and in government entities, I just have to throw out a challenge that is always there, but we don't always talk about, is funding and legislation to get that funding to do something like this. I see this as something that would definitely cost money, big benefit, but we need to be able to get the funding to do it.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. I think Michelle, to your point around when you were sort of thinking about this question and looking at maybe even some other places where they've implemented an absconder unit, there are lots of questions in terms of how might such a unit actually function, and then what are the relationships that unit, wherever it's housed, would have with the other systems and individuals that are working with a particular youth or child. What are the roles and responsibilities and protocols that would then come into play in implementing such a unit. And so I think that's what, if there was a recommendation that came from this task force around implementing a dedicated unit with this role, I think those would be some of the kinds of questions and things that would have to be fleshed out and considered in terms of making it not this like ethereal thing, but something that is actually applicable in reality. Brandon, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say about this. One of my concerns with something like this is that it can be a lot of time consuming energy and a lot of money being spent to something that doesn't really solve the problem. All right, it doesn't stop runaways, and there's still risk that is happening, bad outcomes to kids in between when a kid runs and when this absconder unit is out looking for a kid. It doesn't really stop runaways from out of home placements, and would it prevent, some of the bad things that have happened to kids when they run, and maybe that, but it's really, a reactionary intervention that is just assuming that we're conceding that runaways are going to occur. And so is it really is that where the investment needs to go? To me, I don't know. I mean, I'm for anything that helps, but at the end of the day, one of my goals would be where do we put the investment to stop, kids from running at all, and not just assume it's going to occur.
Yeah, I think you are bringing us back to kind of the important point in making sure that we are thinking about not just what to do when, assuming that that children and youth are going to abscond or run away, but also really investing in prevention efforts. And again, we'll come back to that as we really dive into that particular component and trying to prevent kids and youth from running away. But I think that the thing that I'm sitting with most, and many of you may be as well, is we know that that resources aren't unlimited, and so as this group grapples with recommendations that necessarily will include, I'm sure, some interventions that are like risk mitigation once kids when kids run away, but also how do you divvy up the resources or make recommendations that where you're putting the resources in the right place to have the most and best impact on kids and youth.
Doris, can I also just add, is that okay? Can I jump in?
Yeah.
So Brandon, I'll say in Doris, I think this is what you said, but I'm just going to be, when we look at that roadmap and we get to prevention in October, right? That's when we're going to really need to just focus on prevention, which it'll be interesting for some folks to be like, but we know that they're going to run. So then what do we do? We're like, okay, well, that's response, right? Now we're talking about prevention. So I don't want to say let's not talk prevention at all. However, the directive that we're really responding to is around coordinated responses, meaning that, not saying that this group is saying it's just a given, but in the case of the directive, it is saying what are the opportunities for coordinated response. So that's kind of the reason that we are sticking to that point of coordinated response versus the prevention side, because of the way the directive is written. So I just wanted to be clear about that around kind of why we're honing in on it the way that we are.
No, I get that. And I'm not trying to say that it's not an important conversation. What I'm trying to say is that in this particular thing, I think it would cost a significant amount of time and energy to create for something that I don't know if it is. So when I'm talking about this directive, I don't know how much bang for your buck you get out of this.
Okay, I got you.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, I got you. All right, cool. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you for that, and thank you for also just sort of recentering us in the directive that we're focused on today, Trace. And I think Brandon, back to your point, is that's one of the challenges, is just recognizing that there are limited resources and thinking about where those investments should be made, and the extent to which this particular approach may not have the most benefit that outweighs the challenges. I appreciate you naming that. Renee, you also in your survey response spoke to the need for resources in order to support an approach like this, and resources that are not just statewide allocated, but really are regionalized. And so I'd love to hear from you on just sort of your thoughts and reflections and thinking about, this concept of standing up in a statewide absconder unit, and, again, diving into the challenges and benefits.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is in thinking it through, when we talk about a statewide unit. I'm not sure how well that would function in our state if it was like, a designated centralized team. I mean, we have a, fairly large state. We have, local control. And so if it were, I could see it function perhaps as a system statewide that had, the kind of the boots on the ground people be more from the local areas, maybe with, state, state standards. I could see CDHS doing some coordination or review or assistance from that level as a state agency. But yeah, it's hard to imagine how, how like a unit, a single unit statewide would really accomplish this, even just travel time and if you're looking for a kid who's run, it's not just a one-time thing. You go out and you guys, strike force, you just go out and do something and then come back. I mean, you really need potentially over days or weeks having people checking into places and things like that. So I think that's what you're referring, what I was mentioned in the survey that you're referring to. Do you want me to go on and add some other thoughts? Well,
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, just, in terms of reacting to what Brandon was saying, I have similar thoughts. One is, we've talked a lot about who these kids are, what the circumstances are, but I think one thing that I still have a gap in my knowledge is, which kids are at the highest risk and how do we identify those to correctly allocate the types of responses. I do think it makes sense that there's a graded response depending on the features of the youth themselves. I know that there's some, I wasn't at the last meeting, but I know it sounds like there was some discussion that you want every kid to be looked for, and of course you do, but the reality is there's kids that we would be less worried about, and just due to limited resources you really can't have an intensive search for everybody. So I think identifying when the kids are at most risk, who is at most risk, et cetera, would be important for this. I know some of the protocols from other states and from DC have ways they've kind of triaged that, but I'm wondering, what the data is for our state in terms of who those kids are. I also think that this is also something that Brandon said. I mean, there's several points of intervention. There's prevention we'll talk about later. There's the, during the run, which I'm assuming we'll talk about later. It's, it's a little bit prevention, it's a little bit response. Then there's the, immediately after the run. And I think that's partly what Brandon was referring to. And any kind of absconder unit would, it takes time to pull together, some of the protocols talk about within 24 hours, certain things happens, but, certainly some of the kids we've talked about, the tragic outcomes were in the, minutes or hours after. So, what can happen there? And then I guess, one other thought is that it's one thing to have people actually kind of having a protocol to come together, but there's also communication across systems that could be improved and could, might be really help some of these efforts. I've learned that in some other states, there's just automatic alerts between school systems, the child welfare systems, and the police, that if there's any interaction or event with any of those entities for youth, including like if the police go out to the family home or to something that may not be with the youth themselves, that an alert shows up in the other systems, so that, for example, if if there's an event happening at school, something concerning, the child welfare worker would know that and might know to check in more on the youth. If the child has run, the police would have an automatic alert. So if they happen to, pick up that kid for anything, or have contact with them, they would know it's not just a kid living at home who, if they seem okay, they just let them go on their way, that we would know that there's, that's a kid who might need some extra services, et cetera. So that, that seems like could be a really important way to do things. I know our systems have tried to, electronic systems have tried to have the ability to talk to each other more. And that's a, huge project, which with a lot of barriers, but if it was pared down to a simple alert system, I wonder if that's something that would be more accomplishable and could really support these kind of efforts, in addition to other protocols.
Awesome. Thank you, Renee. So you actually dove into like all of the things that we're going to be talking about today in greater detail. So I appreciate that. I think naming the some of the challenges with having a statewide structure for the absconder unit, and sort of really thinking about the role that kind of a centralized or statewide team could play in developing standards and protocols and things like that. But then also the need to have the coordinated response that happens in local communities. Kind of this what I would call like the way that Colorado's child welfare system is set up, where you have like a state supervised, county administered system. So something like that also reflects county control and administration, but also sort of thinking about how the budgeting, resourcing from a financial perspective, I think, gets allocated is another consideration, I think, that would have to be thought through from the state and local perspective. And then I want to come back to some of the ideas and thoughts that you had around the protocol. So, then getting into the considerations around what a coordinated statewide approach might look like in terms of like the what and the how communication and coordination happens across systems, how youth get identified and sort of signaled as a different level of priority, which we did have some conversation in the last meeting around how to distinguish risk associated with different kids and youth. And then I like this idea around some kind of a technical alerting system, but want to flesh that out a little bit when we start talking about what that statewide, kind of guidelines and protocols, what that might look like. Lynette, I want to come to you on again these two questions around the challenges and potential benefits of an absconder unit, and just get your thoughts and reflections.
I think the challenges is that Colorado is a large state. It's for square miles. There are 64 counties, 62 county offices. We have approximately 3,000 children in out-of-home placement, if memory serves me correctly. I don't know how many we have on that are listed as being on the run at any given time. And so that piece of data would be crucial in trying to determine the best, how many absconder units you would need, whether you could do regional or just one statewide or different things like that. If we were able to follow Dave Lee's recommendation about boots on the ground, it would have to be regional in the state. You can't identify a kid halfway across the state and wait until tomorrow to get there, especially in the winter. I do like the idea of absconder units. I believe that if you want consistency and you want a standard protocol, that they need to be employed by the state, not necessarily employed by the county. And I say that because counties get a certain amount of funds to use for resources, and they are going to put them where they think they need them the most. If this money comes to the state and they have the standardized protocols and they have the access to all the information, then it could be more streamlined, is what I'm envisioning. Now, somebody from the state may disagree with me, and that's completely okay. but I do believe that regionalized would be a better method for us. Smaller counties are never going to be able to afford to hire even one person. Denver County has a pretty good, robust program going right now, which is awesome and amazing, but they're not necessarily an absconder unit, but they do track down kids and go find them. So that's kind of what they're doing. And DYS does, and they are a regional system through the state as well. And so I think if you're going to structure it, that would be the best way to get the biggest bang for your buck, as Brandon was talking about. Knowing how many youth that they could actually search for at any given time would be important to know. And they would have access to the systems and the computer systems that they need to help identify where these youth are located. So that's my thought about that. I also had one off the cuff thought that I would like us to jot down before I forget it, because I think it's important. Right now we have runaway youth shelters for youth that are not in the custody of the Department of Human Services or the Division of Youth Services, where youth can run to. For some reason, though, they're not open to kids in foster care. And it's a licensing issue. And if it's a licensing issue, it's an issue that can be solved. And I'm not thinking about counties being able to place kids there, but making it available for a safe place for kids to run to. And then the county can go get them and bring them back to placement.
So can I ask just a follow-up question on how those work in practice? So if a youth who's in foster care shows up at one of the runaway shelters, what happens?
Our local runaway shelter contacts the county to see if they're in custody or not. If they're in custody, they're not allowed to accept them into the program. They will sit around with them for a little bit until we can get out there. But some counties, kids run from a long distance and they can't get there soon enough. And kids will then, oh, you had to call my county. Now I'm really running.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Trace, I see you pop in and then we have a couple of hands raised.
Yeah. Brandon, I saw you first, but I was going to say, I was really curious, Lynette's point about the state, county versus state, and some sort of like statewide protocol response. I was just going to say, Dennis, I'm very curious because I'm sitting back as an outsider wondering at the county level, if you were to get some sort of like statewide protocol, unless the state had the ability to do some sort of like accountability and implementation support, is that something that the county just like rolls their eyes at and is like, yeah, we're going to do what we need to do for these kids? Or like, I just don't know those tensions and challenges. And so I wanted to hear from like Dennis on the, like, what would that take at a state level to do any sort of effort in that way? Or maybe you feel like you already are in some ways. And then I also wanted to get I think that the county state thing is just a really interesting piece to kind of tease out a little bit more. So Dennis, jump in. Curious what you're thinking.
I agree with Lynette. If we want consistency, then it would probably need to be operated at a state level, and then probably regionalized. I agree with Lynette, and then I also agree with Renee that people have to know the local areas to be able to actually do this effectively. I wanted to touch on one other point Lynette made. Licensing doesn't have any opinion of kids running from care and then going to a homeless youth shelter. I used to operate a homeless youth shelter. What the issue is the federal government that funds those homeless youth shelters says that a kid that's in county custody cannot be in that homeless youth shelter. But we used to do the same thing. We would hold on to that child or youth until the county came. So I wonder if we can work with our homeless youth shelters around that, because that does happen quite a bit which is interesting that a child or youth would run from one facility and go to another facility, but it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
The other thought I had is that I think makes me push this to the idea that it needs to be operated at the state level is running from a facility is not a crime. So we would have to really care for, and I'll be interested to hear what the Tennessee people say about how do they actually intervene if they find a youth that's on the run. What are they actually doing? Are they handcuffing the kid and dragging them back to? I mean, what we have to really care for what that looks like. How do you get the child or youth back to the facility? I would really like to see that done in some kind of trauma-informed manner. One that is the least traumatizing as possible to the child or youth. Because what I think is going to happen, I think the absconder unit is going to find that they're dealing with the same smaller group of youth, children and youth constantly. Like, so they find the youth, they take the youth back to the facility, that youth runs almost immediately again, and they're looking for that. I think that that's what the absconder unit is going to find, is they're going to be really looking at the same children and youth consistently.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dennis. I think that there was a lot that you want to unpack, and I want to come back to this, the trauma informed approach, and I think that there may be an additional opportunity in your breakout groups to talk through, you know, kind of as you think about both the absconder unit idea in general, and then also kind of the statewide protocols. Thinking about what that could look like, including the trauma response piece. Brandon and then David.
Yeah, I was kind of gonna talk a little bit what Dennis was saying too. Like, I think, you know, when we talk about something like an absconder unit, like what abilities would they have, and like, so to me, this is, you know, right now you currently have law enforcement that is handling, you know, this. Is it a scenario where you invest into law enforcement and you know, locally, and that's how you you know, do this, because they would have, you know, the investigative techniques, they would have the, you know, a leg up on a lot of these things, and because they're already doing it. And at some point, if you do have an absconder unit, if you're really trying to, you know, get that kid and get them back, you know, you would imagine that law enforcement would have to be involved at some point anyways. So, you know, is the route, if you were going to do something like this, through, you know, investing in law enforcement to be able to carry out a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I think you raised the what I think may be one of the tensions that this group ends up, I don't know if tension is really the right word, but we'll be grappling with in informing and developing specific recommendations around, you know, when you think about who might be the right system for this intervention, recognizing that they may have the core skill set in like locating youth and just sort of like the investigatory kind of techniques. But then also, and this is where the tension piece comes in, may not have the skills in understanding the unique and specific needs of this population, and responding and intervening in a way that recognizes trauma and the fact that kids running away is not a criminal act. And so some of the things that Dennis raised, sort of like that balance, right, in you know, trying to make sure that you have the right folks who have the kind of the core techniques and skills, which includes deploying interventions that are appropriate for the population. I'm going to go to David, and then Renee, I see that you raised your hand as well.
I was gonna, real quick, sorry, David, I was just gonna jump in and say that also brings up, Doris, that like kind of tension you're talking about just goes back to like what folks said in the previous meetings, is like, this doesn't dismiss the fact that at the basis of the needs of these kids are relationships and people that they trust and know. And so we're talking about this systems level while also saying, then when do you bring in the folks that these kids feel comfortable with, but also like, you have to find the kids and you have to make sure that they're, so I just like, I'm kind of here, I just wanted to like bring out the word relationship, Doris, because I think that's what's sitting on the other side of that tension that we're not naming exclusively, which is you can find a kid and then, you know, to folks' questions, what do you do with them? But then also like, how do you bring in the people that know that kid, right? Not just that are trauma informed, but also like,
Yeah,
like have a relationship, and what does that look like? So anyways, I just wanted to name that's a thread I'm seeing from previous conversations, that I just wanted to call it explicitly. So go ahead.
You're muted, David.
Sorry, need to unmute. It's still taking me 3.5 years. So I was just going to add on to some of this stuff that Dennis was saying, and Brandon, is making sure that running away is not a criminal behavior, and that would be a challenge, is to not make it criminal. And because once they are found, or once they come back, I mean, that's the other thing. There's a possibility of them just coming back, and detention is not the answer to that. I'm coming from the DYS side. I mean, I can always go, when one of our youth are picked up when they've run away, we always have a place for them. But that's not always the same for county departments. I mean, we've lost so many contracted placements or QRTPs or RTCs and group homes and foster homes throughout the years. A kid could come back or be found, and there's not a place to put them. And then the other question is that, I mean, let's say they get picked up fairly quick, we still have to assess whether they've been victimized, exploited, and is going back to that particular foster home or placement or whatever the right place for them? Or are we causing more harm than good by just turning around and putting them right back where they ran away from? I mean, so it's challenging. So I guess I was just going to add that. I mean, when it comes to the absconder unit stuff, definitely see the benefit, but there's also two sides of it. I mean, there's the piece of just the gatherer of information, the holder of information, making sure people are not forgetting about a runaway. I mean, it's pretty easy to go, all right, we focus on them for the first few days to a week, but all of a sudden it's 2 months down the road. Who's really thinking about them? I mean, I'm just being realistic here. Sometimes you just go, all right, somebody's looking for them, hopefully, or they're just going to be found at some point, and then what? I like the absconder unit because it always keeps them in the forefront. We're always, every couple of weeks, every 30 days, we're reevaluating this, bringing this particular youth's name back up, re-looking at whatever we need to look at. We don't forget about them, or we don't forget about them. And the other thing is, we don't give up on them.
Mm-hmm.
We continue to look for them. And then the other part of it is the boots on the ground. I mean, we're talking a lot about that, but there's two sides of it, and it can be implemented in a variety of different ways. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Renee?
I think the challenge with when your hand is raised and then you have to unmute, that it's easier to just, if I do that all the time, if my hand is raised, because I
walking and chewing gum.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just because I think, I think so many of these comments are so important about needing to be trauma informed and what do you do, immediately after and all that. And, it makes me think that, one way to sort of capture all that is that we really need to be thinking of what does this youth need to help them along their path in life. Ultimately, it's one thing to say, well, they're at risk when they're running, we need to pick them up and bring them back or find them and all that, which, is just, seems pretty important in the abstract, but, just simply having somebody who can find them, pick them up and take them somewhere is not necessarily going to be, helping the youth overall if it's not done in a way that is helpful to the youth, if it's not trauma informed, if it's, if it's, like they're saying, if you're bringing them back to some place that is potentially unhelpful for them, things like that. So I think just having the overall context of keeping in mind that the overall goal is to do right by this child and help them have the best outcome overall. And I'm not at all saying that means they shouldn't look for them and find them. It just means that that's a really narrow way to look at it. And we just need to look at the whole process and how can that be done in a way where it's not simple. The goal is not simply just to find them and then now have them back in custody. So yeah, I can imagine there, would need to be a team approach that law enforcement has the skills to investigate and find someone potentially. I don't know how we coordinate or dictate protocols to local law enforcement all across the state, or if there's a role of state patrol. I don't really know how well they work, but maybe law enforcement then identifies them, but hands it off to some regional trained absconder personnel who are the ones who then maybe try to go out and actually make contact, or enlist the other folks that are helpful to them or whatever. But I think it has to be thought through in all those details.
Awesome, thank you. There are a couple of things that, Trace, I see that you came off mute, but I want to just sort of recap some of the things that I think that are just top of mind with what you shared, Renee. So I love that you brought us back to the kids that we're talking about, and sort of really thinking about not just the systems and how would the systems carry out, what would they need in order to make this to actualize this idea, but really thinking about how can we design an approach like an absconder unit that really does center the needs and outcomes of the youth that we're talking about. I think that was just, for me, that was really important. And I also like the idea that you named around, you didn't use this particular language, but sort of this multidisciplinary approach where we are thinking about the specific skills that different partners in the larger systems can bring to the table to ultimately address this very important issue. But instead of thinking about who can we train up to do these other tasks, like training law enforcement to be, really trauma informed, or training child welfare to do locate, not suggesting that those would necessarily be the answers, but maybe thinking about this from a multidisciplinary approach, and how can we put together teams where they're maximizing the expertise that those teams already possess in service of finding, intervening, and meeting the needs of kids and youth who run away. Brandon, I see you have your hand raised. Oh, I was going to come back to you, Trace.
You're
but
good.
I'll go to Brandon. Okay.
No, Brandon, go ahead, and then I'll jump in.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. It's absolutely important to, ensure that, the approach is, in the best interest of kids. But I always, I want us to understand that, and I think we all do, but, or hopefully do, but when a kid runs and it's habitual, especially, these are trauma responses, right? And so when we try to apply rational, reasons, to connect with them, a lot of times in their minds, they did this at some point when they had trauma that it was made them feel safe, in their mind. And at this point, the actual running is how they feel safe. Okay. And it's not necessarily so they have a opposite interest of what we're trying to do. They do not want, they want being, running is where they feel safe. It's not really a lot of times a specific pre thing that has caused it. They just want to be on the run because that response has been habitual and has built a safety net for them. So the way to get out of that is to be able to give them the opportunity to learn a different habit and feel safe in another arena. So a lot of times in the beginning of that, it is actually resistance that they're going to provide right off the bat. And and that's where a lot of the challenges with when Dennis, mentioned it's the same kids over and over again. There is really no rhyme to reason at this point. They don't need, a lot of times they don't even know why they're doing it. It's just a response that they have learned, from wherever that, the trauma has started. And they have to be given the time to, and professionals the time to be able to break through that resistance. So they learn other habits and break that down and other ways to be safe. And if they're constantly on the run, they're not going to be able to do that. So to me, and I get it, no kid's gonna, to me, the approach isn't they're gonna want to go some magical place or magical, a lot of times the adults, and I always bring up to my staff, like, you know, my kids, like, they don't want to go to school, but they're going to school because that's what the best interest for them to, you know, to do. Like my own kids, like, it's the same thing. Like, they're not going to want to be anywhere. They're not going to want to be at a, you know, these things. They're going to want to be on the run. And if you drop them off somewhere else that they're able to run, they're going to run again and run again. And at the end of the day, that's the problem. So we are going to be forcing them to do something they don't want to do. And I want to keep that in people's minds, because you know, some of the stuff, you know, might look good on paper, but at the end of the day, like, we have to get that kid, get them to a place, and make sure they stay at a place. And so there's time to work through uh, these trauma responses.
You had a lot of amazing nuggets in that, Brandon, and you know, one of the things that I'm just reminded of is that this is not a rational act on the part of these kids. Lynette put in the chat a question, I think it was posed to you, around whether you think that they feel they have more control when they run. And so you mentioned that it is a trauma response. And so is it that, you know, that this act has more control?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, they feel like, you know, whatever happened or wherever, you know, they got this, you know, habit, it's kind of like smoking. Like, you know, if you like smoke a cigarette, you're gonna relax, but it's unhealthy. But it met a need at one point in their life, and then you keep smoking cigarettes, and all of a sudden you're smoking cigarettes for everything. It's not just to relax anymore, and it's a bad habit. It's the same thing. At some point, they ran. It made them feel good. They continued to do it. Now, at this point in their life, they're doing it all the time for anything, and it's because that feeling that they had, it makes them feel, whether it's control, whether it's safety, whatever the reason is, it's what they do now. And that's a habit that has to be broken. And very few people want to break those type of habits. So a lot of times in the very beginning, you have to, it's resistance, and you have to give them enough time at a place, at a situation where you can break down that resistance and get to them and break that habit before they're going to have healthy habits and see that there's other ways to accomplish what they're trying to do without having the unintended consequences in their you know, in what they're doing currently right now. But to prove that to a kid, let alone an at-risk kid that's thinking irrational, it can often be a challenging and very difficult thing to do, because, as we all know, kids know everything in their mind. So, but you know, it's one of those things. Like, I think that resistance part, they're not like these events are not. They're not, whether they tell you they want to go someplace or that, it's not about that. A lot of times it's more about you know, that this is a habit that they've learned, and there's nobody going to tell them that it's not healthy to them.
Thank you for that. Renee, we're gonna come to you, and then Trace, we'll leave you with the last reflections before we head out to break.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on some of the things that Brandon was saying, because I get what you're reacting to, Brandon, and I think I totally agree that, and so I also wanted to clarify when I'm thinking of that we really need to think of what's in the best interest of the kid overall. I don't mean to suggest that for some kids you might need to do something that they really don't want to do. I do think, though, that in that case, that the decision has been made that is what the kid needs, that this is a kid who, like you're saying, it's a reaction. What they really need is containment for long enough to learn some new behaviors. So I think it's a differential response depending on the kid, but that doesn't mean that for some kids, you really just need at any cost to get them back safe again. Whereas another kid, maybe who it's a much more stable kid who, ran for different reasons. You might not want to have the same, kind of capture them approach, because that might, set them up for distrust or things that they don't have. So yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. And I think that in the space of figuring out what's the best for each kid long-term, that might mean some kids, it's a more forcible response than others, or some kids might, kind of, I think you just really do different things depending on the scenario of the kid. And for some kids, it will look really different than others.
Thank you for that. Trace, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I know we need to head to break after this, but a lot of clearly lots of conversations we had. We're gonna have a ton of time in breakout groups, and I've tried to split up the folks on the panel as much as I could into different groups, since you've already kind of shared your initial thinking, so that you're not just talking back and forth to each other again, but that we're bringing in other members. But the thing I'm thinking about is, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but as we look at these directives and we're talking about coordinated responses versus prevention, et cetera, the through line I'm seeing here is that those, Brandon, your points around the how, right? That like we can talk around the coordinated responses, but then what, sort of thing. I think I could see those living in the criteria, right? That's like a best practice in those coordinated responses, right? So there's this coordinated response level of the way that law enforcement works with, residential, et cetera, those sorts of things. We need to make sure that like this group gets to recommendations around that. And then I think where this group really, the different voices are going to be helpful are the then what, right? Like what actually like informs that piece. So I'm just kind of wanting to differentiate between the two, the systems level piece, and then also your expertise around the kid themselves, right? And like what to do with a child, we're talking about humans, right? We're not just talking about the system. So I think when we go into the breakout groups, there will be a great opportunity to talk around for folks that are kind of at the systems level, right? So I'm thinking Lynette and Dennis and Michelle and David, like you're thinking about what would actually like a coordinated statewide effort look like. And then Brandon, you're like, but then what about this kid that then is brought back to me? Then what do we do, right? There's both of those things can exist in these recommendations that we're trying to drive towards. So I just kind of want to remind us of that too. So with that said, the other thing I'll say is that we've got to get specific, right? We've got to get kind of out of the clouds on what would be and land on something. And we're not saying that the word absconder unit is where we land as a group, right? But what we are saying is like it sounds like there's a lot of momentum around an entity of some sort, a coordinated effort. Sounds like Dennis, for instance, not saying that you speak for the whole group, but Dennis, you saying, yeah, I agree that for consistency purposes, it needs to be at the state level. So what we're doing on our end is drawing out those pieces. And then I think, in the next meeting, we can kind of come back with where we all land with all of these different ideas. And whether or not that's an absconder unit or we call it something else is kind of neither here nor there. So that's the only thing I wanted to say, Doris. I'll step back though and say a big thank you to each of you for kind of getting in and digging into these questions, because I think there's a lot of different points here for a lot of great different reasons. And I'm hoping that as we go into a break and then we come back, that folks can kind of take this conversation, bank it also with their own experience and expertise, and then really think around as we draw towards these recommendations, what would you recommend, right, specifically? So Doris, that's all. I don't know if that's, I'll give you a chance to kind of close things up, and then let's head into a 10-minute break.
Fantastic, thank you. So I think just trying to recap some of the themes, it was clear that it sounds like there is some momentum and agreement around this idea of having some dedicated resources. To Trace's point, whether we call that an absconder unit or not, or what that lands on looking will still need to be fleshed out. But really the some agreement, it sounded like, on having a dedicated resource, and also some agreement around having some statewide protocols that that sort of provide a clearer expectations on who does what, and an opportunity to really flesh out some of the details of what the what is and who the who is, and really trying to balance the unique needs of different classes of youth, and wanting to have a system that is truly responsive to those unique needs, and having opportunities to flesh out what might be the right response for, a kid or youth at a particular moment that is both coordinated and also customized to their unique needs. Before we go to break, wanted to pass it over to you, Stephanie. I see your hand raised. You're muted. You did part one, lowering your hand.
It's too many things. Pressure.
I actually lowered her hand for her. Go ahead, Steph.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I just want to thank you all because I think this conversation really highlights the complexities. And so Trace, just in terms of us going into breakout rooms, I think I just want some greater clarification because here in my brain, this is what I'm thinking is, to Brandon's point, right? It's prevention. What are all those things that we should be thinking about before we place children in their foster care or their residential placement, right? What are the diagnostic tools? What are the questions we should be asking of their parents, right? As I was reading some of the Tennessee materials, for example, they were saying how there has to be a strong survey of family members going, where do you live? And when this child is run in the past, where do they ever go to you? Like trying to put some of that map together before a child is even placed or run. So I think of it in three phases, right? Pre-run is sort of all that prevention work, right? What are all those things we as professionals should be thinking about? Then I think about the run, which goes to the absconder unit idea, right? Well, we got to do something. We just can't let them float around out there, right? We're adults. We have to make sure they are safe, right? So what are those intervention efforts? And then when I think about when children are returned, it's both prevention and intervention, right? It's prevention, like how do we stop this from happening a second, third, or fourth time? That goes to Brandon's point, the treatment issues. But also it's the intervention, which is, are you safe? What medical exams do you need? What sort of, other evaluations should we be doing to determine what sort of harm might have come to you, right? So I'm just trying to, in my brain, Trace, find a framework for us to keep bouncing back between this prevention and intervention. And I think that is the struggle, is it exists in different phases of the act, for lack of a better word. And I'm just trying to get guidance from you about how we might guide our conversations such that we don't choose prevention over intervention in our conversations, knowing that in the same space, they could both coexist.
Yep. I'm thinking, so here's what I'm thinking. Let's take a 10-minute break. I'm going to rework the way that we do our kind of note catcher for folks while we're out. I think this idea of like leaving a space for people to respond both at prevention and intervention to whatever the prompt is kind of going to get at what you're saying, because we don't want to do one at the exclusion of the other, right? So we'll leave space for both. So how about this? Let's take 10 minutes. We'll come back at 9:35. Doris and Stephanie, I'm going to give you both a call. We'll kind of sort out how we want to shift a little bit based on this conversation, because I think it's a good shift. And then we'll come back at 9:35 with the group. We'll give you some instructions around breakout groups, and we'll go from there. Sound good? Okay, cool. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
Ray, should we just stay on this line? It's probably just as easy.
Let me call you.
Okay.
Yeah, since we're recorded. Okay. All right. Alexis, thank you for that. Appreciate you keeping us on time. I said everybody 9:35 and then we were late. Okay, I think we figured it out. So a couple of things. I'm going to share, I know we figured it out. We figured out how we want to do these breakout groups. And I've broken them up again, tried to take panelists. And sorry, Michael, can you unspotlight everyone that's on here while I'm kind of chit-chatting so I can see the whole group? Perfect. And then I am going to drop in the note catcher that we're going to use. And once I do that, folks pull that up. Then we'll kind of talk through our prompts. So we did a little bit of a shift from the original questions that were in the survey. So go ahead and open that up. Just dropped it in the chat for folks. And again, if there are members of the public here, you are welcome to observe in the breakout rooms. But the folks that are generating the note catcher itself should be on the task force. So I just want to make note of that, but it is a public document. So welcome folks to get in there and see how people are thinking. All right, so looks like there's a lot of anonymous grizzlies and elephants in my document. So I'll be talking through this. So really we're trying to get, we're trying to land the plane, as Stephanie says, on some of these pieces here as it relates to these directives. So really want to get specific on these two questions. I am going to highlight. First one, if you could create a statewide dedicated system to youth who have run from care, what would you do? How would it be set up? How would it be funded? Who would be operating? What would their charge and goal be? I'm going to start with that. What would their charge and goal be, Doris? If you can kind of shift that language up to the top. I know that we were going to do that. So what's the charge and goal? Renee, you were kind of talking about that as like, what is the purpose, right? Of a statewide unit? Is it just to find the kid, right? That sort of thing. So clarifying from your perspective, what would the purpose be? But we really want to generate ideas here. And so, and again, we're really talking about the intervention side. However, we don't want to squash prevention. So if ideas are shared on either of these prompts that kind of land more in the intervention side, which we know is very possible, just put a little prevention, put a little P next to it so that we know that, while this isn't necessarily intervention, that you're talking about prevention. So just put a little P in parentheses next to it, would be super helpful for us. And then the second piece is, what would you include? So going to the kind of guidelines and protocols. So that first one is really like, an absconder unit, for lack of knowing where this group is going to land. The second one is around guidelines or protocols. So what would you include in standardized guidelines or protocols for A, finding a child or youth who has run away, B, meeting the needs of child or youth once they have been found. So these guidelines could include protocols for human services department, facilities, and law enforcement. If it's important, again, we're talking about coordinated efforts here. So if there's a reason that you'd want to break it out, that, this would be for law enforcement, this would be for counties, this would be X, that's helpful. But we also know that this is kind of in service of like statewide protocols that might include any or all of those agencies we listed. Stephanie or Doris, just because we kind of like ran through this, any context I'm missing as far as like really what we're hoping to get from folks in these breakout groups?
Nope, nothing additional. I think you did a nice job. I made the edit in the document itself. So we wanted to start with that goal as the seminal question in these this standardized unit. Perfect.
Okay, cool. So any questions from task force members before we break it out? Does this make sense? Do you have questions? Or are you like, what are you asking me to do? Let me know. Okay. Wow. My rambly directions, they worked. Oh my goodness. Okay. So it is 9:41. I'm going to give us, let's see here.
Am I supposed to stay in this one? I don't think I did it right. Look, I'm the one that didn't.
Sir, what do you mean?
The breakout groups, right?
Oh, you're not, we haven't done it yet.
Oh, okay. Just kidding.
Yeah. It's just me. You're still here with us all. Sorry, I was spotlighting folks. Janelle's like, wait a minute. Okay, so I'm going to break you out. I was just looking at time. Let's do 45 minutes in these rooms. I'm going to check in probably every 15 minutes. But again, feels like a lot of time, not a lot of time if you're thinking about statewide protocols and units. And what we'll do is we'll summarize for our next meeting what we hear. So really, we want you to just brain dump ideas here. And if you need us to come in to your group, just drop a note. Otherwise, we'll just kind of be popping around. Sound good? Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to put it on for 45 minutes.
Sorry, this is Norma. You're going to put us in the group, or do we have to do something?
No, I'm going to put you in the group. If you don't automatically kick out, I'll put you in there. But I'm going to open the groups now, and you'll see a timer at the top. Thanks, everybody. All right, so lots of fantastic discussion happening based on the note catcher and us popping in. It seems like lots to talk about. And I'm sure you could continue talking, but would love to. Here's how we're going to do this. So we've got 4 groups. We need folks to be succinct. We have a ton of information to pull from in the note catcher, but we do want you all to kind of voice over the highlights of the different discussions you had. So I'm going to go down with the groups. I'll just name the first person that I have listed in the group and whoever wants to share out. But how I'm thinking is we're just going to go by question instead of by group across both questions. So let's focus on really on this first question here around if you could create a statewide dedicated system, right? Regardless of what it's called. I did see that someone came up with a good name, so I'd love to hear more about that. But you know, what would you do? So I want to hear what your groups came up with, and we're going to start with group 1. Dennis, your crew.
Okay. Well, before we get to that, we want to be very cautious that we're not all on board with this idea of this unit yet. We need lots more information. And we want to also be very cautious about what the protocols of this unit would be. And we would want to clearly define everything that this unit would be doing before we would really feel comfortable agreeing with going forward. I'll pause there to see if anybody in the group wants to disagree with that. I don't think they would.
So Dennis, if we're taking from this meeting and we come back to you all with something more to respond to, is that kind of what you're saying? Like,
yeah, we need more information.
Okay. Yeah,
and we
sure,
think that we definitely want to hear from this Tennessee group.
Yeah.
Okay, so now then the question, if there's going to be this unit, and I want to preface this by saying it wasn't that Dennis said it should be this way, that the group kind of came to this, right? So, and I'll have others join in if they can. We think it should be housed possibly in CDHS. We don't know that law enforcement's the right entity, possibly to house it. Now, as far as like how to fund it, and this is where I think, like, you know, like being a state employee, I kind of know these mechanisms. It could be funded in 2 different ways, but one way that it could be funded, and we'll see what Stephanie thinks about this, is if this committee makes the recommendation that we move forward, possibly then the CPO might want to run a bill that would say, hey, we want to create this unit. We think this unit should be housed in this place. And then there would be a fiscal component to that bill to fund it. That's kind of where we got to. If we want to move forward with it, but remember, we're not really all on board that this is the right direction, possibly yet either. Although we do see benefits to it.
Did you all name, sorry to just jump in, Trace, I saw you come off mute too, but did you all name like what the specific challenges that you have with, you know, sort of that are keeping you from being on board?
Well, so Lynette helped us get past a lot of that. So Lynette, can you come in and say, oh, you have your hand up. She has some great ideas about it not just being an absconder unit, but also an intervention unit. So Lynette, if you could.
Yeah, we talked about calling it a location and intervention program teams. And the reason for that is go find someone, but in the case of Elizabeth's son, he would just run for a short amount of time. Well, a team is not going to go start hunting for him. But if we set up the system in such a way that every runaway, even a short-term one, gets reported to these teams, the data could be tracked. This kid seems to be a chronic runner. We decided not to call them absconders after Janelle looked up the definition. That means fugitive. But they could then work with the program, provide support to the placement provider, and develop an intervention plan, a prevention plan for that specific youth and child. And so it kind of kills 2 birds with 1 stone in the fact that we're still paying attention to the 2 big, huge issues in the room. We also talked about how there is currently a statewide structure in place. And how could we capitalize on that? And that is with the Division of Youth Services. Obviously, different populations, different laws apply. A youth that has escaped from the Division of Youth Services custody is not quite the same thing as a youth that has run away from placement. But what can we do to capitalize on that structure? What can we learn from it? What can we do better? And it's a part of the state, it's a part of the Department of Human Services. Could we incorporate that across the whole state? Might be a way to save money and expand their protocols. We also thought that, I'm looking at my notes, sorry. We didn't want to say what state agency it would come under. That's going to take some research to determine who would benefit from it most. But what we did identify was that if these youth are not leaving placement and they're getting the treatment that they need, it is more likely than not to shorten the length of stay, which saves the state money. Also, if we have an intervention program that supports these placement providers with these youth who run away, maybe our in-state providers will start accepting some of these youth instead of having to ship them out of state, which is even more expensive and riskier. So that's kind of where we came from. Is in a lot of ways, this is going to save money while saving some lives.
Yeah, and Lynette, really appreciate you kind of spelling out those details. And so just to this group and for everyone else's context, this is exactly what we were hoping for. You know, we weren't saying that this group is moving forward with a quote unquote absconder unit and that's it. We just wanted we wanted you all to react to something that has come across our table so that then you could then build from that, even if it's building something different. So I love that y'all are kind of like iterating on yes and. That's exactly kind of what we were hoping for here. So Lynette, really appreciate it. And Janelle, I see you with your hand up, so go ahead.
I was just going to piggyback on what Lynette said, just in a little bit more detail. But it's really hard to move forward with any of those questions without identifying some of the hindrances. When it comes to funding, we put things forward, but we're not supporting the issues to make those things successful. And if we don't talk about some of the hindrances and the issues to push forward with these new recommendations, then we're just setting people up for failure. And I used, Family First Act as an example. We pushed a lot of things forward with that without thinking about some of the other things that would really fall behind in that. And in my opinion, and what I see a lot is that it's really turned into quite the disaster. I don't think that the benefits outweigh kind of the negative from it. And I don't want that to happen here either. I want it to be successful. And talking about having a specialized team, not necessarily law enforcement or DHS, but building almost an MDT task force type of thing that responds to just this. And that's what would be funded from it. And this is just what they do. And then also making something like a tool when a kid is identified gone and basically filling it out to what level do they rise to on that tool to, warrant this certain protocol type of response based on how that tool was filled out with them currently and past stuff and how you move forward with that response. Because every case is going to be a little different and we can't refer or recommend something based on one individual when they're all different. And so there has to be some type of screening tool to keep that. And then again, supporting the providers, whether it's kinship, whether it's foster, which there's almost no foster for teens anymore. So it's not even really a thing. And these private and these provider state placements, how are we supporting them to make sure that they feel that they can take this kid on? Because so many of them say no because of their run status. So we've got to look at those situations as well and how we're going to support them so they are actually successful. Because if they're not supported, then the youth isn't supported. And so I thought that was one of the biggest problems that we're seeing.
Yeah, appreciate that, Janelle. Appreciate that kind of dive into details. One thing I'll say here, and Stephanie, I don't want to overstep on your role as chair and recommendations, but I could see the opportunity for a work group around this particular, whatever this recommendation shapes up to be and some of those details. So I think Janelle, like some of those pieces in Lynette, what you just named, would house themselves really well as we kind of get into the weeds of whatever this shapes up to be. So just want to name that. But for the purposes of time, I'm going to move us on. Second group, again, we're focusing really on this first question. Let's, if there's anything that the first group named that you also are in agreement with, anything in addition to add, or anything that your group kind of came up with that you see differently, let's kind of stick there for the sake of time. But give you a few minutes, and I'm going to group 2, which is Renee's group.
Okay, does that mean that I'm the spokesperson? I guess I'll start.
I guess so.
My computer just went off. So it's in terms of what you just said, in terms of like picking things that are a little bit different, not already spoken to. One of the things Dave talked a bit about the system within DYS where they actually contract with a private entity. So rather than having specific FTE that are salaried hired to do this, having a contract that's available with people trained to locate someone, all that. We talked about importance of, really gathering information up front, getting the right information available immediately to have to inform the process and individualize the process. I think we were thinking more narrowly than the first group of just in terms of answering this question and the processes really more specifically, more just concretely and narrowly. We talked about, kind of whatever the process, it would be important to have kind of some kind of co-responder option to ensure that there's folks more trained in the, trauma informed, the potential behavioral health aspects of things, et cetera. Let's see. Oh, we talked a fair amount about the need to have, some kind of temporary placement for many of the youth where they may not be able to go back to their prior placement, or it may not be appropriate to, and but also, recognizing there's a lot of challenges. Let's see, it's, Anna in our group has experience with exactly that sort of placement in Denver. So that should be a great resource for thinking that part through in the future, if we're going to look at something like that, that all the challenges of operating something like that. But yeah, where do you take the kids if they don't have a placement to go back to immediately? That seems like a really crucial piece of things. Let's see. Part of the protocol afterwards, clearly there'd be some kind of need for evaluating for the medical and forensic needs of the youth, and what other services they might need immediately. And I think those are some of the main things.
I'm going to pause you there because I think you're onto the second question on that.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, you're good. You're good. I was like, wait a minute. Okay. So just hold on to that, but I appreciate you sharing that piece. I'm going to jump to the third group. I'm just looking at our time. So trying to drive us forward.
Can I say one more thing quick?
Yeah, please.
But it applies to the first. We just really want to underscore the need for what's the response immediately. And maybe this is what the first group was talking about, having, this broader concept of it. But yeah, a lot of the high risk kids, it's the immediate period that before a whole unit would be enacting that would be key. So we agree with that part.
So just to make sure I'm hearing you highlighting that, like the immediacy of it, and like being really clear around what this unit is capable of in the immediacy versus.
Yeah, probably any protocolized response team wouldn't be able to act immediately enough. So what is in place there? And I think the first group conceptualizing, that's where, in my mind, that's part of what they were conceptualizing by talking about location and intervention program that would, and capture the whole range of needs and not just like a protocolized team that would be finding the kids.
Gotcha. Okay, appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to move us on to group 3, and I'm going to give you just a couple minutes. And apologies, not trying to cut folks off, but I'm driving us with our time remaining, and I haven't seen any members of the public request public comment. So if you're hearing me and you're a member of the public and you do want to make public comment, please just drop a note to me in the chat. Moving on to group 3, sticking with that first question around a potential team, if you will, unit. Michelle, that is your group. Anybody can speak to it, but would love to hear from your group.
I was not able to take notes. My Google was not working. So I think, I think had a lot of the same ideas that have already been stated. I think we talked about having a place for the kids to go when they are picked up. I think something that I kind of wonder about is what happens if the kid refuses to go with this team of people? And then the funding thing, I think we were kind of stuck on, and we kind of felt like it should have been housed with human services. If I'm missing anything, I apologize. I was not able to take notes.
No, you did great. And thank you, Michelle, for stepping up, because I confess that none of us wanted to talk. And so Michelle just totally got thrown into it. And so the other piece I would add is that we said multidisciplinary and trauma informed was really important to us. So thanks again, Michelle.
Becky, when you say multidisciplinary, can you just tease that out a little bit more? I just want to make sure I'm.
Yeah, we talked about, it seems it would be an appropriate thing to have in human services, but there's a law enforcement component, there's a therapeutic component. So there are different folks that are just not human services employee types that would need to be at the table.
So nothing that hasn't been named as far as the different disciplines, though, as far as who you see at the table for a unit like this.
Correct. Does our cell phone idea go in here in this conversation, or does that need to wait till the second question?
Sorry, what'd you say?
I'm asking the other people in our breakout room if the cell phone idea can come here, or should
we put it under the third column, but I think you can talk about it anywhere, Becky. Just Trace, on your question about, when we talked about our multidisciplinary team, we talked about there being an investigator, but I just want to make it clear that doesn't necessarily mean law enforcement. There are lots of investigators that work that are not detectives. So maybe it's law enforcement, but maybe it's not. It's more of an investigator sort of role to pair with the social worker potentially and the therapeutic person.
Yeah, appreciate you naming that, Ashley. A fun fact about me and Stephanie trying to track down people from this Tennessee team that hopefully we can get to come to the next meeting. I wrote some guy on LinkedIn who said he was an investigator for the absconder unit in Tennessee. And I was like, hi, this seems out of the blue. Haven't heard back from him yet, but appreciate that point about the difference, because they use the word investigator as well, but he's not with law enforcement. So very curious to hear about what that means for their team. Beth, I saw your hand up. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, and then just similar, like identifying who your partner agencies are, like where there might be that law enforcement component of a disclosure of abuse, and sticking with the trauma-informed approach, being able to, like, it's not just going to go back to a patrol officer. We've had a disclosure to a service provider. So next step should be directly to with your child advocacy center with a forensic interview, as opposed to making this youth talk to multiple different agencies and repeatedly tell their story over and over again. So building out those partnerships with maybe, that law enforcement agency and then the child advocacy center, knowing that they're not going to be necessarily the people that are part of the response team.
Okay, thanks, Beth. Appreciate that clarification. I'm going to move us to the last group. Stephanie, your group, who wants to share?
Yeah, I'll just go ahead. Yeah, I would say that we had a vision for there being a state entity. The purpose of the state entity would be to generate policies, protocols, training, education, awareness for regional units. The group felt regions were going to be easier to tackle, right, than trying to implement a discrete protocol in each individual county. The idea was also that it was multidisciplinary in nature, and that the regional team would really be the spokesperson or the hub for all communication, including even the assessment. So in other words, a foster parent or facility might make that initial outcry notice to the regional center, and it was the regional team that would then pull trails. They could call parents, they could find out what assessments have been done, and really pull together a profile picture and rate that, if you will, for lack of a better word, about how we ought to respond or what method that should take. So I would say that was sort of the big scheme. The other piece that I think is important, I think this mirrors one other group though, is that when you were to recover kids, what would you do with them, right? How do you provide sort of a therapeutic moment of intervention before just straight return? And it was decided that the regional team could do that assessment, given that they would be sort of the case manager for this runaways case, for lack of a better word, not a human service case manager, but somebody who was managing the runaway piece of this. And so that those people could sit with, again, the team, the parents, whomever, and decide what are the next steps for this individual child. And then lastly, I think we envision potentially a prevention piece in a statewide unit because of the training and awareness issue. So that is something that could standardize people's practice. And group, jump in if you'd like. I did not have my notes to refer to directly.
Stephanie, can I ask a clarifying question? In the case of your group that you talked about, are y'all talking about this as a protocol that this happens and you have to go to this team? Or is it, when we talk about those different levels of kids and the different kinds of, like, does it always run through a team in this scenario? Or is it more that they run that filter first at let's say the residential facility, and they hit this tier and then that team is engaged, right? Or that unit or that regional group, versus handling it kind of like at the residential facility because they were at this other tier. Did y'all get into that? Or is that, I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I think in our, vast 22 minutes, the initial vision was, that a facility or a foster parent would call that into their regional team.
Okay.
And then that would be the hub of expertise along with the facility and the foster parent, right? Trying to create a case plan, for lack of a better word, for that youth. But that was a real basic sketch.
A real like coordinated effort versus like a handing over situation. It's more like, you're a resource to me in this situation.
Right.
Maybe an assessment or screening tool also to maybe determine response level.
Yeah.
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 Thanks.
Okay. Yep. Thanks, Chelsea. Okay. All right. So we've got 9 minutes left. There's no public comment. What I would love is to give want to give folks a chance to go through and speak to the nuances in the note capture. You don't have to read everything verbatim because we can take it from the note capture, but just want to kind of have you voice over for each group the highlights of this separate question, which is around potential protocols or guidelines and really kind of what your group talked through. So let's go back up to the top. Another person can jump in or the same person, doesn't matter. But Dennis, your group, whoever wants to jump in around the second question where you all landed.
Sorry, I was having a hard time with the mute button. I'm trying to think through before we landed on the second question. So I might have to call for a lifeline on this one. Lynette, do you recall where we landed on this one?
I remember.
Oh, go ahead, Janelle.
We kind of talked about how the meeting the needs and all of that, which we kind of touched on needing a tool, but this type of, intervention could shorten out of home placements. So, and hopefully with these unit and in-state providers would be more likely to admit these kids, which we kind of talked about that. All of our questions kind of meshed into one, honestly, Tracy. We really thought about the hindrances for all of them and we meshed it into one big one, which we kind of talked about in the first thing. The only thing that we didn't really touch on is how maybe we have short-term goals in each of these, placements, obtainable goals for these kids to step down to lower things, reward these small things to break those addictions in order to make them step down to lower placement, really reward that and put that in the intervention program as part of the protocol. So we really meshed all of the questions into one when we talked about it the first time we spoke, honestly.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. There's certainly a lot of potential overlap here, right? But we also wanted to break it out in case there were specific examples that needed to kind of live in these very two distinct examples. So I appreciate you making that point.
Yeah, and we broke it out pretty in depth over all three in the note catcher. So it's there.
Okay, perfect. Let's move on to group 2. We've got 2 minutes for the remaining groups. Group 2, anything to add? I know, Renee, you kind of like dove into that side a little bit. So I'll kind of actually bring it back to you to sort of clarify based on all the other conversations and what else you want to say around where you all landed on this second question.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a lot more to be said. We talked the where do they go, assessment of their immediate needs, and then we didn't go into things after the sort of immediate aftermath, but certainly we all agree that the overall kind of then therapeutic response to minimize risk in the future would be important. But I think those things have all been touched on.
Yeah, and I'll say one of the threads I'm noticing through the note catcher is like the needs of the child as part of this protocol piece. I'm curious if anybody could speak to that we feel like is that because there is a lack of protocol right now of like determining immediate need for a child's, right? Like first we got to get them food, we got to get them safe, we got to get them clothing, we got to, like get them their medicine if they've been missing their medicine, those sorts of things. Is that just because we know that that's the first need, or because that's not a current protocol that is followed consistently? I'm just seeing it come up in multiple groups. So I just wanted to ask if anybody had any insight to that, if that's something to pull out distinctly, or if that's just kind of like we want to name it because this is a no-brainer.
I think for our group, I'll just say one thing, then turn it over. One reason why you kept mentioning the individual needs is that if we're putting this in a statewide protocol, I feel like it's really important for it not to be so rigid that it is saying this is what you do for all kids, but that the response in terms of who actually goes out and makes first contact, or who does this or that, and where you take them after you've picked them up, really needs to be informed by what we know about this kid. And a lot of times there's a lot known about who's, how to actually pick them up in a way that's going to be successful, or, can they go back? Can they not go back? Things like that. So it was really just, I think for us, like if we're going to make a unified protocol, it has to have the individualized needs accounted for.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense. Just wanted to make sure I was clear on how I saw that kind of showing up. All right. Moving on to group 3. Michelle, back to that group. Anything to add on this question around protocols?
We said a lot of the same things. I think one thing that Ashley talked about that, I think will have a lot of strong feelings one way or another is, kids having phones. That's how caseworkers communicate with them. That's how, if they're still on the run, we can still communicate with them and talk to them and ask them those safety questions. And I know some people are really pro phones, and usually that's the first thing that gets taken away from a kid, right? So we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about like where the kid goes after the basic needs. And then we also have a pretty good conversation around, if a kid AWOLs or runs, there's often a warrant filed, and places are automatically closing that bed. And whether or not the kid can return because it's appropriate or not is a different question. But like, can that be looked at differently, more individualized for that kid, as opposed to if there's a warrant, we just close it?
That is a pretty good summary of what we talked about, Michelle. And I would just want to add one thing and build it out a little bit. When Ashley was suggesting the cell phone idea, she also suggested that the cell phone be preloaded with all that kid's information so that the kid has it and also has access to resources and, places to go and that kind of thing. I thought it was a brilliant idea.
Becky, preloaded with like the numbers of folks that they would reach out. That's what, yeah.
Yep.
Love that. Definitely worked with a kid who was like, had scraps of paper with people that they knew 5 years before. And that was the only way that they knew that person's information. So point well taken. All right. Thanks, y'all. And last group here, Stephanie, back to your group.
Yeah, I think just in the interest of time, I think just our protocols related to really how we envision the unit to be set up and for it to function. So, right. So if you want there to be a multidisciplinary team that is created at this regional level, then the protocols would designate how that should look, who should fill those seats, timeframes in which they should act, whom they should communicate with, right? And then kind of did that for all stakeholders, right? Foster parents, what's your protocol? you would be trained to call whom and be part of what process, right? And so on. So I would say protocols would just have assisted us in the creation and operations of any sort of regional/state unit.
Thanks, Stephanie. Anybody else want to add anything in our last 30 seconds that I'm giving us before I close this out? All right, we have our work cut out for us as a team on our facilitation side. A lot of brilliance shared today, a lot of great ideas. Our job is really to go back and make sense of all the different ideas. And Dennis, kind of to your point, to make sure that we're staying at a high enough level that we're not diving too deep into one specific thing, but that we're really building something based on everyone's ideas for you all to respond to. So that's what you can count on to some degree from the next meeting. We'll be in communication around kind of how that shapes up. I just want to name that those surveys that you all fill out are incredibly important to us as we shape up how these conversations go in the meetings themselves. We really build our agendas around them. So we will get, if we do another survey, we'll get that out as soon as possible and really appreciate folks' participation, even if it's just as, 5 minutes to give us your general thinking, but we use that a lot and we really appreciate it. So with that, I'm going to close us out. Stephanie, any final words? Otherwise, we'll see folks in August. But yeah, Stephanie, anything else?
No, just thank you all. Good to see you.
All right. See you in August. Thanks, y'all.